the collision, the Ascendant had ruled the stars for 20,000 years. Their empire stretched across 73 star systems, each one a testament to their mastery over matter, energy, and time itself. They had solved death through consciousness transfer, ending disease through genetic perfection, and abandoned warfare through pure logic. Violence, they concluded long ago, was the domain of lesser species, creatures still crawling through evolutionary infancy, unable to see beyond their primitive emotions. Commander Veleth stood on the observation deck of the Eternal Theorem, watching a small blue world spin below. Earth, the data streams called it, third planet from an unremarkable yellow star. The survey drones had already cataloged its resources: water, rare metals, carbon compounds. Standard planetary acquisition protocol would begin within the hour. The native species would be relocated to a preservation habitat, their culture archived, their world repurposed. It was efficient. It was logical. It was how things had always been done. The humans, however, did not respond as expected. When the Ascendant's diplomatic construct materialized above their largest cities, broadcasting the decree of annexation in every language their algorithms could decipher, the response was not compliance. It was not even confusion. It was defiance. Within hours, primitive nuclear-tipped missiles screamed toward the construct, detonating in brilliant flashes that damaged nothing but announced everything. These creatures were willing to fight, willing to die, over dirt and water and the concept of home. Veleth found this irrational. Fascinating, but irrational. The Ascendant Council convened across the Lightspeed network, consciousness fragments merging into unified discussion. Military action was unnecessary, they concluded. The humans possessed no faster-than-light travel, no energy shields, no quantum processors. They were children playing with fire. A single Ascendant dreadnought could sterilize their world from orbit. But genocide violated the Preservation Accords, so instead, they would demonstrate superiority, show overwhelming force. The humans would understand their place in the galactic order. 3 dreadnoughts descended through Earth's atmosphere, their hulls ignoring air friction as if physics itself stepped aside. They positioned themselves above New York, Moscow, and Beijing, population centers that human data streams identified as culturally significant. From their bellies, kinetic strikes lanced downward, each one calculated to destroy military installations with surgical precision. Buildings fell. Bases burned. Millions watched on screens as humanity's mightiest weapons evaporated under Ascendant technology. The message was clear. Resistance is futile. But humanity's response was not surrender. It was adaptation. Within weeks, every nation on Earth unified under a single banner for the first time in their violent history. Old enemies became allies. Resources were pooled. Scientists who had spent careers competing now collaborated. The humans studied the wreckage of their destroyed bases, analyzing blast patterns, energy signatures, material composition. They learned.
They evolved.
They weaponized everything. When the Ascendant returned for the annexation ceremony, expecting a defeated species ready for relocation, they found something unexpected. The humans had fortified their cities, not with force fields or energy barriers, but with old-fashioned steel and concrete. They had buried their command centers deep underground. They had filled their skies with crude but effective anti-air defenses. And they had developed something new. Something the Ascendant sensors struggled to classify. Chemical explosives wrapped around radioactive cores, designed not for precision, but for chaos. Dirty bombs. Weapons that would poison their own world just to deny it to invaders. It was insane. It was horrifying. It was tactically brilliant in its desperation. The first human strike came from beneath the ocean. A submarine, ancient by galactic standards, rose to launch depth and fired everything it had. The missiles were intercepted easily, but their detonation scattered electromagnetic interference across the region, blinding sensors long enough for ground forces to activate their surprise. Thousands of humans in mechanized suits, crude exoskeletons powered by combustion engines, emerged from tunnels beneath the landing zones. They carried weapons that fired solid metal projectiles, laughably primitive but effective at close range where Ascendant shields struggled against rapid kinetic impacts. Veleth watched from orbit as her ground forces engaged. The humans died by the hundreds. For every Ascendant soldier felled, 20 humans fell. But they kept coming. They kept fighting. Even when wounded, they dragged themselves forward. Even when outgunned, they found ways to strike back. One human, his body broken and bleeding, had used his last moments to detonate an explosive vest, destroying himself and 3 Ascendant soldiers in a parking structure collapse. It made no logical sense. Velith accessed the emotion simulation protocols, something Ascendant rarely used anymore. She tried to understand what would drive a creature to such self-destruction. The simulation offered one word: hope. Not hope for victory, but hope that their sacrifice might buy time for others. Hope that somewhere, someone they loved might survive another day. For the first time in her 8th-century existence, Velith felt something her species had engineered away millennia ago. She felt uncertain, and beneath that uncertainty something darker stirred, something ancient and primal that her people had forgotten. She felt afraid. The awakening. The war had been raging for 6 months, and the Ascendant Council faced something they had not encountered in recorded history: prolonged resistance. Every strategic projection had predicted human collapse within weeks. Every simulation had shown swift capitulation once they understood the technological gap. But simulations, the Council now realized, could not account for irrationality elevated to doctrine. Humanity fought without hope of victory, yet they fought as if victory were certain. Fleet Commander Velith submitted her tactical reports with growing concern. The humans had learned to hide their war infrastructure in places Ascendant scanning technology couldn't penetrate without damaging the biosphere, a limitation humanity exploited ruthlessly. They built factories in volcanic regions where thermal signatures masked energy production. They hid fleets beneath ice caps and in ocean trenches. They launched attacks from civilian population centers, knowing the Ascendant would hesitate to respond with overwhelming force due to their own preservation protocols. The humans had turned Ascendant morality into a weapon. But it was the human strategy that truly disturbed her. They didn't fight to win battles. They fought to make victory costly. Every engagement was designed to extract maximum casualties from Ascendant forces. Every retreat was a trap. Every surrender was theater masking an ambush. The humans had studied their enemies' patterns and identified a weakness the Ascendant never knew they possessed: numerical limitation. The Ascendant were few. Immortality and consciousness transfer meant their population had stabilized millennia ago at precisely calculated sustainability levels. They could afford to lose ships. They could afford to lose time. They could not afford to lose individuals because each Ascendant represented thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and experience. Humanity, by contrast, seemed to possess an infinite supply of people willing to die. The turning point came at the Battle of Europa, Jupiter's ice-covered moon where humans had established a hidden military installation. When Ascendant forces breached the facility, they found it abandoned except for a single human soldier sitting in the command center. She was young, barely into her 3rd decade, with dark eyes that held no fear. Velith's ground commander approached cautiously, weapons trained on her. "Why do you fight?" the commander asked through translation protocols. "You cannot win. Your deaths serve no purpose." The human smiled, a strange expression that biological studies suggested indicated joy or defiance. "You're wrong," she said softly. "Our deaths serve the greatest purpose of all. We teach you something your species forgot." She pressed a button on her console. "We teach you fear." The entire facility detonated. The human soldier, the Ascendant ground team, and a carefully positioned fusion reactor all vanished in an explosion that carved a new crater into Europa's surface. The shockwave caught 2 nearby Ascendant frigates, damaging their navigation systems and forcing emergency evacuation. 1 human life for 73 Ascendant casualties. By humanity's mathematics, it was a victory. News of the sacrifice spread across Earth's networks. The soldier's name was Sarah Chen, age 27, mother of 2. She had volunteered for the mission knowing exactly what it entailed. She had recorded a message for her children, telling them she loved them, telling them to be brave, telling them that some things were worth more than life itself. The video went viral. Millions watched. Millions wept. Millions enlisted. Velith finally understood what she was facing. These creatures didn't fight despite their mortality. They fought because of it. Every human lived with death as their constant companion, which meant they had learned to extract meaning from their brief existence in ways the Ascendant never needed to. Every moment mattered. Every choice carried weight. Every sacrifice could be noble. The Ascendant had evolved beyond death and, in doing so, had evolved beyond the urgency that made life precious. The council convened again, but now the discussion was different. Voices that had advocated for escalation now counseled caution. Reports from the front described Ascendant soldiers hesitating before engagements, questioning orders, requesting withdrawals from high-casualty zones. Some had even begun experiencing what historical databases identified as trauma responses, psychological damage from witnessing repeated human sacrifice. One counselor proposed orbital bombardment, complete sterilization of the human homeworld. It would be efficient. It would be final. But another counselor pulled data from the historical archives, from the species the Ascendant had encountered before achieving galactic dominance. There were patterns. Species that fought with this kind of desperation didn't simply vanish when their homeworld was destroyed. They scattered, they hid, they remembered, and they returned. Humanity would not forget. Humanity would not forgive, and with centuries or millennia to develop their technology while nursing their rage, humanity would become something far more dangerous than they were now. Velith was granted emergency authorization to attempt something the Ascendant had not done in 8,000 years. Negotiate with an enemy. She would meet with human leadership. She would seek terms, not because the Ascendant had been defeated. Their military superiority remained absolute, but because they had discovered something more powerful than superior weapons. They had discovered that the will to die for something makes you invincible in ways technology cannot overcome. The meeting was arranged on neutral ground, the lunar surface visible from both worlds. Velith stood in her environment suit, watching through her faceplate as the human delegation arrived in crude landers that spat chemical exhaust. They walked with determination despite their inferior equipment. Representatives from nations that had spent centuries at war with each other now united by a single purpose. One stepped forward, an older male with gray hair and tired eyes. "You wanted to talk," he said. "So talk." Velith processed thousands of potential approaches in milliseconds before speaking. "We underestimated you. That was our error. We believed strength came from superiority. You have shown us that strength comes from refusal to surrender. We seek peaceful coexistence." The human studied her for a long moment. "You killed millions of us. You tried to take our home. And now you offer peace because we made it too expensive to continue?" Yes, the honesty seemed to surprise him. He glanced back at his delegation, then forward again. "What are your terms?" "Withdrawal from Earth and its satellite systems, formal recognition of human sovereignty, technological exchange protocols, and—" Velith paused, accessing words that felt foreign to her consciousness. "An apology." The human delegation erupted in discussion, voices raised in their crude communication methods. After minutes that felt like cycles, the older male turned back. "We need guarantees, treaties with teeth, and restitution for our dead." "Agreed. Then we'll talk." As the delegation disappeared back into their landers, Velith stood alone on the lunar dust, staring at the blue-green marble of Earth hanging in the black sky. Somewhere down there, billions of humans were going about their lives, eating, sleeping, loving, fighting, dying. Living with intensity the Ascendant had forgotten. She felt something new coursing through her consciousness. Not fear this time. Something else. Something the historical databases identified with a word that had not been used in Ascendant language for millennia. Respect. The new truth. The treaty was signed on Mars, chosen specifically because neither side considered it home. The ceremony was broadcast across human networks and Ascendant consciousness streams simultaneously, witnessed by billions in both civilizations. The documents were inscribed in three forms: human written language, Ascendant quantum code, and a third symbolic version designed to be readable by any species that might join them in the future. It was history crystallized, a monument to the day the galaxy changed. Velith watched as the human ambassador, the same gray-haired man from their lunar meeting. She now knew his name was Secretary General Martinez, pressed his hand to the signing interface. His biometric data encrypted the document, making it binding under human law. When she placed her own appendage against the surface, her consciousness fragment sealed it under Ascendant protocols. Two species separated by millions of years of evolution agreeing to coexist. But the treaty was only paper and code. The real change happened in the spaces between words. In the months following the armistice, something unprecedented began. Human scientists were granted access to Ascendant scientific archives, carefully curated sections dealing with medicine, energy production, and environmental restoration. In return, Ascendant researchers requested access to something humans possessed that no other species in the galaxy had maintained: comprehensive military history. Not weapons specifications, but strategic thinking, tactical adaptation, the psychological frameworks that allowed humans to fight beyond rational calculation of odds. The Ascendant were trying to remember how to think like warriors. Not because they wanted war, but because they had finally understood its value as deterrent. A civilization that could not fight was a civilization perpetually vulnerable. A civilization that would not fight but could. That was something different. That commanded respect. Velith found herself assigned to a new role: liaison officer for the Joint Human Ascendant Research Initiative. Her consciousness had been flagged as uniquely adapted to human thinking patterns, possibly damaged by exposure to human emotion, though no Ascendant would say it quite that directly. She didn't mind. She had volunteered for the position. She wanted to understand these creatures better. Her first visit to Earth was overwhelming. She materialized in New York City, one of the population centers the Ascendant had attacked during their initial invasion, now rebuilt with a fusion of human architecture and Ascendant materials technology. Buildings that had been reduced to rubble now soared higher than before, gleaming with adaptive alloys that could repair themselves. But the design was unmistakably human, chaotic, artistic, inefficient in ways that somehow made them beautiful. Secretary General Martinez met her at the UN building, his face more weathered than she remembered. Humans age so quickly. Welcome to Earth, Commander. I hope you'll forgive the security measures. Some people still have strong feelings about the war. She noticed the armed guards, human soldiers in advanced combat armor, hybrid designs incorporating both human and Ascendant technology. They watched her with eyes that held neither fear nor hatred, but something more complex: wariness, professional assessment, the look of warriors evaluating another warrior. I understand, Velith said. We took much from your people. Forgiveness should not come easily. Martinez led her through corridors filled with representatives from every human nation, their skin tones and facial structures wildly variable in ways Ascendant genetic uniformity had never produced. You know what surprised me most about your people? He said as they walked. You actually apologized. In all our history, when powerful nations conquered weaker ones, they rarely apologized. They rationalized. They claimed necessity or destiny or the burden of civilization, but you admitted error. That meant something to us. It was logical. We did err. Denial would serve no purpose. Maybe, but I think it was more than logic. He paused at a window overlooking the city. I think your people felt something you didn't expect to feel. Guilt, shame, maybe even grief for what you'd done to us. Those aren't logical emotions, Commander. Velith processed this, examining her own consciousness patterns from the war period. He was correct. She had felt grief watching human casualties, horror at the destruction her forces caused, shame when she reported civilian collateral damage to the Council. Emotions were supposed to be simulated, training protocols to help Ascendant understand other species. But somewhere during the war, the simulations had become real. Perhaps, she admitted quietly, perhaps your species changed us more than we changed you. The summit lasted 3 days. Scientists presented research collaborations, medical advances that would extend human lifespans, quantum computing interfaces that would enhance human cognition, clean energy systems that would end resource scarcity on Earth. In return, humans offered insights that seemed trivial but proved revolutionary. Chaos theory applied to quantum mechanics, evolutionary psychology frameworks for predictive modeling, and most importantly, philosophical texts on meaning, purpose, and mortality. On the final night, Martinez invited Velith to an informal gathering. No cameras, no official protocols, just representatives from both species sharing a meal. Humans had insisted on preparing food themselves rather than using Ascendant molecular synthesis. Something about the act of cooking being important to them. The dishes were simple but served with pride. A young human woman, an astrophysicist named Dr. Amara Okafor, sat beside Velith. "Can I ask you something personal?" When Velith indicated agreement, she continued, "What was it like, watching us fight? From your perspective?" Velith considered her words carefully. "Terrifying. Not because of your weapons, those were crude, but because of your eyes. Every human soldier I observed had the same look. They were afraid to die, but more afraid to fail. More afraid to let others down than to face annihilation themselves. We had no counter-strategy for that psychology." Amara nodded slowly. "My grandfather fought in the Battle of Lagos. He survived, but most of his unit didn't. He told me once that he wasn't brave. He was just more scared of living with cowardice than dying with honor." She paused. "He passed away last month. Got to see the peace treaty before he went. He said it was worth it. All of it. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be. He lived a full life. That's all any of us can ask for." She smiled. "You know what's funny? We spent so long thinking aliens would be incomprehensible, but you felt fear, just like us. You learned to value life just like us. Maybe we're not so different." Velith looked around the room at the gathering. Humans and Ascendant, once enemies, now sharing food and conversation. Some barriers remained, cultural differences, communication gaps, residual suspicion, but they were trying. Both sides were trying. "Perhaps not," she agreed. "Perhaps the greatest truth in the galaxy is that all sentient beings, given enough time, enough pressure, enough reason, can learn to understand each other." The summit concluded with announcements of joint colonies, shared research stations, and cultural exchange programs. Young humans would study on Ascendant worlds. Ascendant consciousness fragments would embed with human institutions. Two civilizations once on the brink of genocide, now walking toward a shared future. But the real legacy of the war was less tangible than treaties and technology transfers. It was the story that spread across the galactic networks, reaching species the Ascendant had absorbed without resistance. Civilizations that had surrendered rather than fight. They heard about humanity, about the species that stood against impossible odds, about creatures who chose death over submission, who turned their mortality into a weapon, who reminded the galaxy that courage still mattered. Resistance movements began emerging on absorbed worlds. Not violent rebellions, the Ascendant had learned from their mistakes, but political organizing, cultural preservation, demands for autonomy. The Ascendant Council, now including human advisory members, chose negotiation over force. New treaties were drafted. Old annexations were revisited. The empire that had ruled through superiority began transforming into a confederation built on consent. Velith stood in her quarters aboard the Eternal Theorem, now permanently stationed as Earth's orbital guardian, rather than its conqueror. She accessed the historical record she'd been compiling, thousands of hours of human testimony, battlefield analysis, psychological profiles. She was writing something unprecedented in Ascendant culture, a manual on human military strategy for defensive purposes. But more than that, she was writing something else. A memorial, a record of every human who had died in the war, their names, their stories, their final words when available. Humanity had taught her that individuals mattered, that every life carried weight, that death meant something precisely because life meant everything. She tagged the file with a title in both languages. They Refused to Lose, The Human War and What It Cost. Then she encrypted it with the highest preservation protocols, ensuring it would survive as long as Ascendant civilization existed. Future generations needed to know, needed to understand what happened when immortality met mortality, when logic met passion, when the unchanging met the unbending. Outside her window, Earth spun in its orbit, blue and green and alive, covered with billions of creatures who would live and love and die in the span of time. An Ascendant considered a brief moment. But in those brief moments, Velith now understood. Humanity accomplished something her people had spent millennia forgetting. They made their lives matter, and in teaching that lesson, they had changed the galaxy forever.